welcome to the BoshNRoll channel. If you want to support my daily Eternal Magic offerings while getting amazing perks like the BoshNRoll Discord community, have me play your deck on the channel, or listen sideboard guides before tournaments, check out the Patreon or YouTube membership program. This channel is possible because of these amazing sponsors. Check them out, all their links are in the video description. As always, thanks for being here. Let's go play some Magic.
Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. Today I'm doing a live tournament recap from the Top Deck Open 10K cEDH tournament that happened last weekend, and I won it. First place at the end of the event, and I actually did not lose a game the entire weekend. It was a pretty good showing, I dare say. TopDeck.gg ran a circuit last year. They're doing it again this year of cEDH tournaments across definitely the US, maybe the world. I imagine you could book one somewhere else, but don't quote me on that. But it's a point system with like different tiers of like bronze level events offer a certain number of points, gold level events offer a certain number of points, etc., up to platinum level events. And this was a platinum level event, the first platinum level event of the new season. And that means I'm automatically qualified for next year's Invitational already for winning the first platinum event of the season, which is nice because, like I'm saying, I failed to qualify for the Invitational this year. For those who have been following my arc, I started playing cEDH about 2 years ago. I won the first tournament I played in. I won the second tournament I played in. I top 16 the third tournament I played in. And then I have not put up a result in about 14 months. Last July was the last time I put up a top 16, and I've played in probably 6 to 10 tournaments. I don't know the exact number, but that's a lot to play to not put up a result after that explosion onto the scene. And it feels good to get one back under the belt. We are so back, as they say. If this is your first live tournament report with me, basically I just review my Twitter feed. I live tweet all of my tournaments as they unroll. And if I do well enough to be worth making a video out of, I review that feed and do my best to fill in the blanks. First, let's talk about the deck I played, which is Rograkh Silas, the go-to kind of eye roll, turbo, very good, fast, disruptive combo deck in the format. I am not going to take any kind of credit for the development of the deck. I did nothing. All of my stuff came from this. This is Bryant Cook's Rograkh Silas Storm Combo Primer on Moxfield from theepicstorm.com. Not only is his list available to the public, that you could just see what he's up to and his current card selections, but he has this massive primer, introduction, how to play, mulligan guide, additional resources, card choices, FAQ, deck updates. This thing is a monster. And when I decided to explore Rograkh Silas as a deck I wanted to try, I came here. This thing is an incredible resource. And I read it all more than once. And then I also talked to Bryant about some other stuff. I talked to Zane, who is one of the founders of Top Deck, who is also a ROG monster, putting up a bunch of events. Congrats on top 16ing the Envy. I know he wanted to win, but top 16 is pretty good. There's a lot of variance in Magic. It's hard to win every tournament, even if you are the best player with the best deck in the room. It happens, but great run by Zane. And between Bryant and Zane, I felt extremely prepared to play a deck that I had never seriously played before. Let's talk about this deck a little bit. The commanders are Rograkh, son of Rograkh, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. Rograkh is the real commander. It costs 0, which means it's just in play. A 0/1 first strike mana trample. This thing mostly printed as a joke, I imagine, of wouldn't it be funny if there was a Kobold Legend? But it has a lot of implications for other cards that exist. Patrick Sullivan recently on an episode of the Unsleeved podcast called this Mox Ruby in the command zone. And I don't actually think that's even generous enough because it's way better than Mox Ruby in the command zone. Silas Wren is there for the colors, but there are like a couple synergies in the deck that this can be useful for, but Rograkh is what we're really doing here. The fundamental thing about cEDH is you want your commander to represent mana, a win con, or card draw, and Rogsi is all the way in on your commander represents mana, because these really don't do anything. except help lay up the cards that you've chosen to put in your deck. And those are cards. The cash out for Rograkh is, we've got Diabolic Intent, a demonic tutor you have to sacrifice a creature to use. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 creatures in this deck, not counting Simian Spirit Guide. So Diabolic Intent, obviously, needs some help to get set up. And you have the 0 mana commander. Jeska's Will, a burst of mana or a burst of cards. If you have your commander, do both. You're always going to have your commander. Deflecting Swat, Deadly Rollick, and Fierce Guardianship are all in this deck as well. And these are a negate, a misdirection, and an exile target creature that are free if you control a commander. Flare of Duplication from MH3. You could sacrifice a non-token red creature rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Rograkh is that. There's also Culling the Weak. Sacrifice a creature, get 4 black for 1 mana. Rograkh does that. Paradise Mantle, Mox Amber, Springleaf Drum. This is a near creatureless deck, and we have all of these things that only make mana if you control a creature. And then Phyrexian Tower as well, second creature at black. There's a ton of stuff in this deck that pops off with you having a creature or specifically a commander, and that's what Rograkh's really doing here. The only real synergy with Silas Wren, and this is going to come up in my tournament report, is Mount Doom. For 7 mana, you could sacrifice Mount Doom and a legendary artifact, choose up to 2 creatures, and destroy the rest, activate it as a sorcery. The legendary artifacts in the deck are Mox Amber, Mox Opal, and Silas. Artifact creature, we did it. We found a use to play Silas for real, not just for the colors. And all you're trying to do with this deck is assemble Thassa's Oracle somehow with an empty deck. The cleanest line is setting it up with Demonic Consultation. Choose a card name, exile your top 6, then exile till you hit that card. You just name a card that's not your deck, then your deck's empty. Tainted Pact. Flip cards till you decide to stop, and you get to keep the last one. Just flip until you have no cards left in your deck. Now your deck's empty. Then Underworld Breach plus Lion's Eye Diamond and Brain Freeze will also get your deck empty. Set up a loop, and then you could cast Thassa's Oracle while you're empty. And then there's just a million ways to make that happen. As far as intimate details of every card choice, I will let you read Brian's primer for that. But recent upgrades that have really sent this deck into the stratosphere are Valley Floodcaller, brand new from Bloom Burrow. Flash, you may cast 9 creature spells as though they had flash, and then it has some like prowess flavor text on it that it's almost flavor text. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, birds, frogs, otters, and rats you control get +1/+1 until end of turn and untap them. That is mostly flavor text, except you do play Paradise Mantle. Equipped creature has tap, add 1 mana of any color. That means all your non-creature spells are reduced by 1 colored mana of your choosing if you have the otter in play. And if you are casting zeros, you could float and actually net mana. So there is one massive synergy with that, but if you don't have Paradise Mantle in play, it's flavor text. But non-creature spells having flash is busted because before that printing, Born Upon a Wind was one of the biggest things that happened to cEDH in a long time. 1 blue instant, you may cast spells as though they had flash, draw a card. So we're basically just doubling up the best enabler in the deck with just a second copy of that. And Floodcaller, you can sit in play, and you don't even have to set it all up at once. It could just be there, and whenever you're ready, you go. And what those are doing, why you care if your things have flash, is Necropotence. Skip your draw step. If you would discard a card, remove that card from the game. Instead, pay 1 life, remove the top card of your library from the game face down. At the end of your turn, put that card into your hand. Necropotence lets you put as many cards as you want in your hand. You start with 40 life in this format. Necro's usually good for 30, 35 cards, but you have to go to discard because those don't go to your hand until the end step, and discarded cards get exiled, so you can't even just set up a breach line or anything, which is why all your spells having flash means you could just dump out those 35 cards and win in your end step, which is the main play pattern of the deck. And between Valley Floodcaller and Necro Dominance, the deck now has 2 Necros and 2 Borns, and you're just twice as likely to put this together. And then Flare of Duplication, another massive upgrade from Modern Horizons 3, sacrificing Rog to counter a spell. Like, you don't have to control the spell that you're copying. If your opponent Force of Wills your Ad Nauseam, you can either copy your own Ad Nauseam again on top of the counterspell, or just copy the counterspell and target the counterspell. If your opponent casts something like Ad Nauseam, you can copy theirs and yours resolves first, and then you should have a counterspell in hand to counter theirs, and then you win. There's just crazy lines here. Copying Tainted Pact. You pact until you find the Thassa's Oracle on the first one, and then on the copy you empty the rest of the cards. Same trick works with Demonic Consultation. There's just so many lines here that Flare of Duplication makes crazy. And between Flare of Duplication, Double Necro, Double Born, this deck has gotten a lot of upgrades in just the past 6 months or so. Rograkh has historically had a reputation of just kind of blowing its load and then not doing anything if it didn't work, or folding to a single stacks piece like Deafening Silence or Rule of Law. And while those critiques are still things to be aware of, it's much more resilient, much more redundant than it's been in the past, and the results have spoken for themselves over the past half year or so. And the deck was good before then, and it's just gotten multiple huge upgrades. I have historically played Blue Farm, that's Tymna Kraum combo control in the format, and Tymna Kraum has all of the Thassa's Oracle stuff. It has basically all of these same creatures in it, except instead of mana in the command zone, it has card draw in the command zone, which means your deck has to provide the mana, and then you get going, you start drawing cards, and eventually you silence and then try to go off, which this deck just cuts out trying to do anything other than go off, which I have spent the last year not winning very much in cEDH tournaments and looking at 7 really cool, exciting cards in my hand as Rograkh or other turbo deck opponents just go off over the top of me, and I just lose. And I wanted to be the one just winning instead of just losing. So I tried this on a lark. I played, I think, 3 unsuccessful games on Magic Online before this tournament. Magic Online, I love the platform. It is the core of my job, but also the Commander matchmaking. It's just like 3 randos. And if one of them decides they don't like what's going on, they can just leave. And then you're playing a 3-person cEDH pod where, I don't know, it just gets messed up quick. You're not guaranteeing good metagame partners. You're not finishing a lot of games. I had one game hang up and just fail, like the client crashed when I had 35 Necro triggers on the stack under Born Upon a Wind. And I was just like, I'm going to count that as a win. and I logged off. And then I guested on a stream where I played 2 games with Rograkh. And so I had like 5 games of experience, where 3 of them were half games before this event, plus my talks with Bryant and Zane. And that was my preparation for the event. Just pretty close to ice cold.
This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks, and groupings like type, subtype, color, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there.
Let's recap my actual games. And again, like I said, I am just going from memory off of what I could fit into the 240 characters that Twitter allows me per game. And this was just yesterday, so I hope I could come up with some extra insight. Rograkh, just win, hope to deliver on the motto. The first round was Aranus Street Urchin, which is apparently a new deck that has come out. This is a choose a background commander that I have not seen before, but the table assured me they do have a combo kill. And I told them, let me know if you see it coming so I could help if there's something disruptive I could do. And they said, we'll let you know. And then it never came up. Me, Yoshi Silas, which is not something I've seen. That's Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful, the dog, and then Timnacrom, which is the most played deck in the format, and my usual deck. Thanks to reading the primer and my brain dump with Zane, I knew that I should look for hands that could do something messed up on turn 1 or 2. Turn 3 is too slow, turn 1 or 2. So I kept a hand that had a turn 1 Ragavan with turn 2 Necropotence and the mana to cast Born Upon a Wind. And I connected with Ragavan. That resolved on turn 1. I connected, and then I had Dark Ritual, Necro, second land, treasure token, Born, all just lined up. So I was ready to full send, pay 35, 37, whatever, in my end step and go for the win. But my Dark Ritual got mental misstepped, which was annoying, but also it meant that Necropotent was still in my hand. That was way better than getting the actual Necro countered, which I didn't have an answer for. It would have just been gone. But conditional interaction sometimes leaves your opponents in spots where they have to fight over the less important thing. In the turn cycle where I had to skip Necroing, we had a Chalice of the Void on 0 and a Draneth Magistrate come into play. And the Draneth showed up after a sweeper, so Rog was out of the game. All my spells cost what they actually cost. I was not going to be able to get through that. That means you can't Underworld Breach. It means you can't Praetor's Grasp. I'm going to have to actually figure out how to win by assembling Oracle plus one of the consult effects. And I resolved the Necro. I paid 15 life just to set up because I couldn't Born all at once. And my intention was sculpt a perfect hand, Necro again in my next end step, and just win. And in that turn cycle, a player tutored for Collector Oof, but didn't have the mana to play it. And then we got to my turn, and I actually just had, from the sculpt of the 15 last turn, I didn't even need to Necro again. My hand just had Tainted Pact, Thassa's Oracle, and the mana to cast it, and none of it cost 0. None of it was cast from outside the game. And even if the Oof had come down, none of it was artifact mana. So I actually just had the full perfect sweep ready from the first Necro. The value Necro turned out to be a game ender. And that's the power of Necro. Drawing 15 is pretty messed up, much less drawing 35. By the way, the order that I've listed the players is the turn order in each of these, and that matters a lot. Going first always is the best, because in multiplayer Magic, the player on the play still draws a card. It's literally just better to be higher in the turn order. There is no balancing mechanism to the game. The only thing that could even be suggested that it might balance turn order is that Gemstone Caverns is in every cEDH deck, and when you're on the play, you don't get it, or when you're on the play, you don't need it. And also, it's 1 out of 99 cards in your deck, so you frequently don't have it anyway. Yeah, being on the play is just the best, and with a deck like this one that really wants to dump out its stuff first and get ahead of any sort of prison piece, really important. Round 2, Teveshkrom, Timnacrom, Winota, and me. Winota is an interesting deck because this was huge when I first came into the format, like 2 years ago. This was everywhere. I was winning tournaments. Mike Sad and Comedian and a bunch of people were really just out there doing it with Winota. And she's really fallen off. I haven't seen her in a long time, but here she was in a winter pod. And I'm in 4th seat behind Winota. Winota's a stacks deck that puts out prison elements and then curves its way up to just shitting monsters into play with Winota whenever they get around to that after freezing out the game. And I'm ult to 5. I have turn 1 Jessica's Will or Mystic Remora, depending on what the game looks like. I could do either one. But Winota has turn 1 Deafening Silence. And then they have turn 2 Dauntless Dismantler, which makes artifacts come into play tap. And then they had turn 3 High Noon. And the list that I'm playing doesn't play Cyclonic Rift. And Otawara can't remove 2 things. And Mount Doom doesn't kill Deafening Silence. I was actually just dead. Unless somebody else had to clear those pieces, and then I can somehow steal a win. Maybe if someone else Cyclonic Rifts, and then I Born Upon a Wind and win in response to their win attempt. That's really my only plan in that game. And we played for about, the rounds are 80 minutes. We played for about just under an hour, like 50 minutes. And Timnacrom tried to win twice, which is a strength of Timnacrom. I mentioned that's my normal deck. that deck is great when other people are slowing the game down. Like if Winota plays Deafening Silence and High Noon, but I have Tymna and Crom in play, I am feeling great. So Tymna Crom was in great position. They tried to win twice. The table used all their resources to stop them. Then they were out of gas. The table worked together to kill Winota like 3 or 4 times, like the actual creature Winota, not the Winota player. And then a sweeper cleaned up the Winota random things. They had like 4 or 5 power in play and was just chip-shotting people. When that got cleared and we showed them that we could answer Winota 3 more times with our hands, we all just agreed to draw and save 30 minutes of our life, which is great for me. Like that's a conversation that I want to spend some time on. There is a current culture or understanding or level of gaming in the cEDH community where if you are just slightly behind, you start looking for ways to negotiate a draw. And this could be something like there's a win on the stack. I have Pact of Negation. I don't have 5 mana. I show the Pact of Negation and I say, do we agree to draw? Or are you going to die? Like basically, like I could stop this, but it would kill me. I'm not going to die to save you. Let's draw and get out of this weird situation. And stuff like that is just really common. And honestly, I hate it. I think it's really bad. And I believe Top Deck is working on a policy where draws are worth 0 points in the future, which would solve this whole problem. And in this spot, with 30 minutes left to play, I actually think that Winota could have rebuilt. And I think Tevesh Crom was starting to get a little something going. Like when one of your commanders is a planeswalker, you could really wreak havoc on a stalled board. And Tymna Crom, who had been blown out 3 times or twice on their win attempts, me, who was locked out from the stack pieces since turn 3, Tymna Crom proposed the draw. Tevesh Crom quickly agreed to it, which, like I said, I'm not sure I agreed with. I think they had the most going on out of anyone. I was, ecstatic to leave with anything except a loss after the parade of lock pieces that came out. And then Winota was kind of on the fence, like thinking they could get back in it. And then between the 3 of us, Tymna Crom had 2 counter spells in hand. I had 1, and Tevesh Crom had 1. And it's like we could just answer Winota the next 4 times you cast her. And then Winota also agreed to the draw. But I think that is bad. And I mean, I'm not, at no point in this report am I ever trying to shit on any opponent. I'm just talking about from the game perspective. Like the draw is the same thing that happens in 30 minutes if we don't reach a winner. But if you have a little something going on and you have a little something going on and these 2 players have nothing going on, unless Winota or Tevesh Crom think that the other is going to outright win before they can rebuild, at least spend the 30 minutes trying to get your win through, right? Like this was not a situation where I have packed, I could stop it, but then I die. Like, let's all draw so we don't have to do this. This was just the game kind of slowed down to a crawl and nobody really wanted to play it anymore. And I had good reason not to play it anymore. Tymna Crom had good reason not to play it anymore. But these 2 players both could have made something happen. And I think they should have spent those last 30 minutes trying to do that. But it is not my job to make my opponents do what's in the best interest for themselves. And getting 1 point out of a game where I was definitely not going to get 5 points was a great outcome for me. I typed 501 as my my record, which is obviously wrong. It is 101 and I have 6 points. I don't know where that came from. I guess if you're new to cEDH tournaments, you get 5 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, 0 points for a loss in the current setup. So 5 points is a lot. Round 3, I had the first chair, which is going to matter a lot in this game. Magda, Rograkh Thrasios, and another Rograkh Silas. Notice that 3 Rogs at the table. People have figured out that a free commander is busted. I had 4 mana on my first turn to set up a turn 2 Rhystic Study. I think it was like land, Soul Ring, additional mana source, Demonic Tutor, put Rhystic Study in my hand, or something like that. And then Magda had turn 1 Gamble. Their Gamble discarded Null Rod, and then they played Mana Crypt from hand. And I figure Mana Crypt is what they would gamble for. That's a pretty common turn 1 gamble line in decks that are just hungry for mana. And then they use the Mana Crypt to cast Damping Sphere, which is awesome for me because I already have 4 mana in play. My plan is to draw a bunch of cards over a kind of slowed down game with Rhystic Study, and Damping Sphere reducing the other 2 Rog players' abilities to dump their hands means that my Rhystic Study is both going to have time to draw cards, and it's going to be harder for them to not pay the 1, or to pay the 1. I want them to not pay the 1. So the Damping Sphere was great for me. It did predictably slow down the other 2 Rog decks. I played my Rhystic Study. Magda followed up with Tangle Wire, which was even more insane for me, because now you only get 1 normal costed spell per turn. Damping Sphere is going to tax the second one. I'm taxing the first one with my Rhystic Study. And now 4 permanents get tapped in your upkeep, and then 3 permanents. And these 2 players just didn't have permanents. It was like land go from both of them. And so Tangle Wire was just a full 3-time walks on these 2 players, where I just tapped Rograkh Silas and like some extra mana I had and continued to fully function. And I just sat there for a while drawing cards off Rhystic until I was ready to bounce the Damping Sphere with Chain of Vapor and win. I had that set up, and this was super clean Rhystic Study gaming. Round 4, there was a different Rogsai in first chair, Obnixilis, me, and then Timnachrom. This is a scary pod because obviously Rogsai is a fast deck. Obnixilis, any Rakdos commander, is going to be some sort of turbo deck. They're going to have like Bolas's Citadel and Goblin Welder and Ad Nauseam and a ton of mana. And like Rakdos decks just go fast. That's what they're for. And so I'm third seat behind 2 other turbo decks. And I kept a hand that had Mindbreak Trap and a bunch of mana with Ad Nauseam. I was missing my 5th mana, and I was missing my 2nd black source. So I had 4 mana, 1 of it's black. But I had the Mindbreak Trap, which I knew would help in this pod. And the first Rogsai went like Mana Crypt, Cabal Ritual, Necropotence, which turned on the Mindbreak Trap. I cleared the Necro. And Timnachrom mulled to 4. And Rogsai had 1 card left in their hand after that attempt, which put Obnixilis in a weird spot because they had Mountain Mana Crypt and they had kept a hand with Wheel of Fortune, which Wheel of Fortune, if you dump out all your cards and then wheel, it's very good. If your opponents are seeing, like if you wheel an opponent's 6 cards hand and they draw 1 card, but you wheel your 2-card hand and draw 5 cards, that's a good wheel. But now this opponent had 1 card in hand and a bunch of mana in play. This opponent had started the game with 4 cards in hand, and I had already Mindbreak Trapped. I had 5 cards in hand, and they just thought about the wheel for a while, decided to take a slower plan that involved casting Obnixilis rather than wheeling these 2 players back up to 7. And skipping on the wheel meant that I got to dump out all the mana in my hand, and I drew Grim Monolith for my turn. So I passed with 1 card in hand on turn 1. It was Ad Nauseam, and I had 7 mana in play, but only 1 of it's black. And we get back around the turn cycle. Obnixilis is in play at this point, and I drew for turn. It was Verdant Catacombs, smashed it into the graveyard, put Ad Nauseam on the stack. Ad Nauseam resolved because, 1 card, 2 cards at this point. And we had this really fun interaction come up, which is Obnixilis is whenever an opponent loses exactly 1 life, you flip the top card of your deck and you can cast it this turn. So every time I nosed into a 1-drop, an Obnixilis trigger went on the stack, and then after my Nos resolved, the Ob player flipped like 7 or 8 cards. They were all blanks because it's a Rakdos deck. Like, what are they going to do? But that was kind of thrilling to navigate the Nos knowing that there was some mystery number of mystery cards about to roll off the top for one of the other players when I was otherwise pretty safe. My Nos did set up a win, but I had to wheel to get it done. It had like all the mana, half my combo, and Vamp Tutor, but Wheel of Fortune was the only way for me to draw the card off the Vamp Tutor. So I did have to YOLO wheel and refresh the 2 other blue decks at the table back up to 7 to finish off my combo. And I don't remember if they just didn't draw counters or if I drew counterplay to their counters, but my wheel was good enough, and that was the end of that game. round 5 is the last round of the day. We play 5 rounds on day 1, 2 rounds on day 2. Those are all Swiss rounds. It's not a day 2 cut. Everybody could play those 7 rounds. And then the tournament cuts to top 16, which is the semifinals in 4-person pods. And then it goes to top 4, which is the finals in a 4-person pod. At this point, we could all draw and start locking up our top 16s because we all had a lot of wins. It took 17 points to make it to the top 16, and I already had 16 going into this round. A draw just locks my top 16, but I was in first seed, and I didn't want to waste that. And this is one of the brilliant parts of the Command Tower tournament platform. It averages out what seat order you've been in throughout the tournament and runs that against the average seat number your opponents have been in. So on average, you will be first as often as you're fourth, with some 2s and 3s in between. This isn't determined randomly. It's not a die roll. This is like baked into the software. And I knew that if I accepted a draw when I had spun up first place, it would still count in the software as I'd been first once, and I'm more likely to be third or fourth when I have to win later. So I didn't want to waste first seat. I decided to play, decline the draw. This game got really crazy. This was one of the better games I've played of cEDH in life. I had an early Ristic study again. The Kenrith player was banking resources somehow. I think it was a Mystic Grimoire or a Ristic study. I'm not going to have all the details for this, but I'll try to get the important parts. Kalia of the Vast was at this table. This is not a normal cEDH commander. This is a high power casual commander. This is one you roll your eyes at when it hits the table at the LGS, but it is not really a cEDH thing. And Atraxa Grand Unifier is a big, slow deck that needs to get to 7 mana before it really does anything. But once it gets there, it just kind of pops off by cloning Atraxa. We ended up in a spot where Kalia was in play. I had to Time Twister to do something. I had Ristic Study in play. I could Time Twister with 5 mana still available, which is a pretty good amount of mana to convert on 7 fresh new cards and keep the party going. But I Time Twistered, and my 7 cards were like Arcane Signet, 5 lands, and Valley Flood Caller. It was really bad. So I just cast Arcane Signet and passed the turn. And then Kenrith and Kalia spent a long time arguing over how much of a threat I was, while I was like, I just passed with 5 mana open. What do you think I have? Like, that was my window. Obviously, my hand's bad. And then on Kalia's turn, they hit me with an Apple of Eden, which is a Assassin's Creed card, I think, where it exiles target player's hand. You could play cards out of that player's hand until end of turn, and whenever you play a card from their hand, they draw a card, and at end of turn, they get what's left of their original hand back, anything that wasn't cast yet. So they apple me, which forces a situation where I don't want Kalia to have the cards in my hand. I had drawn a couple cards off of Ristic Study between Kenrith and Kalia's turns up to the apple point. So at this point, I have the Bloodcaller, Dark Ritual, Imperial Seal, and Defense Grid in my hand. And I don't want Kalia to get Dark Ritual and Defense Grid because that might just set up a win for them. Or I don't want them to have Dark Ritual and Seal. Defense Grid doesn't matter who controls it, so I can't play that. So I have to play the Flood Caller, which triggers the Kenrith's Ristic Study. Then I have to Dark Ritual, Ristic Study, cast Imp Seal, Ristic Study. So Kenrith is loading up because I'm under duress from this apple. And this is one of the things that I enjoy about cEDH, where it's like, I would have preferred to just not cast any spells that whole turn cycle, but Kalia forced me to do it. Kalia, being the active player, is the person I'm most worried about right now. So feeding Kenrith 3 or 4 cards because they're last in turn order right now versus the person who's actively playing right now, I can't worry about what I'm giving Kenrith when I might be handing Kalia the win right now. So I just dump out those things. I fill up Kenrith, and remember, Kali is in play, and we just wheeled. So any number of demons, dragons, or angels could be in the hand. And I am like begging Kenrith to do something because in response to one of the Rhystic triggers, Kenrith cast a Vampiric Tutor. So Kenrith can have whatever they want in hand right now. Anything that could solve the problem of Kalia about to attack could be in their hand. And Kalia announces moving to combat. Kenrith's just like, yeah, that's fine. Like, they did not find an answer to Kalia. And Kalia attacked, announced their trigger, and put in nothing. Like, somehow whiffed. We did it. Dodged the Big O. And so Kalia just attacked for 2, but that was an exciting moment of tension. And then Kalia's second main starts Dockside, sack Dockside, reanimate Dockside, and then plays a new card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction that for 5 mana both entombs and reanimates a creature that costs 2 or less. And they put Magda directly from their deck into play, who could immediately tutor an artifact or dragon because of Dockside's treasures. And they tutored the dragon from, I believe it's March of the Machine, that you get to exile a card from your deck face down, and cards you cast from exile have Convoke. And then they tapped Dockside, Magda, and the dragon to cast the card that they had just tutored for, which was Saw in half, and they meant to saw their dragon in half and then get 2 dragons. And the whole time I'm like, Kenrith, you tutored. What is it for? And he's just like, I got nothing here. Yeah, that's not what I tutored for. And my Rhystic is going this whole time. Kenrith's Rhystic is going this whole time. And I found at the last like miracle moment Pact of Negation, which countered the Saw in half to keep 2 more dragons from coming in. And then Kalia ran out of gas, had to pass. I'm not worried about Atraxa at all. Atraxa has kind of stumbled on land development and isn't really playing. They mulliganed really low, but we just wheeled them. But they're not a huge player right now. And throughout Kalia's entire combo line, Atraxa was just like, I really can't help here. Yeah, like, sorry, the wheel wasn't good for me. So I wasn't expecting much out of them. But then Kenrith Final Fortuned to steal the turn order, which must have been what the Vamp Tutor was for. They just made this calculated bet of, I could get any card in my deck here. I could get something to stop Kalia, or I could make other people deal with that, and I'll just win after the interaction is flushed out, which is reckless, but worked out extremely well here, because I was out of interaction in my hand. I had 1 mana left and no counter spells in my hand, but I did have a huge hand from Rhystic Study. So you go into Kenrith's turn. It was Mystic Remora the whole time. Sorry, not Rhystic Study. That's what they're drawing on, because it's about to matter. In their upkeep, Mystic Remora ticked up. They had exactly 5 mana in the pool, and they were thinking about paying for or letting Mystic Remora die. And they decided to cast Ad Nauseam off of exactly their 5 mana in response to the fish trigger. So if anyone fights over their Naz, they would get to draw some cards. And because they tapped out, they couldn't pay for my Rhystic. My Rhystic drew Gamble, and I had the Valley Flood Caller in play, so Gamble has Flash. I gamble for Fierce Guardianship. I win the gamble. I did not discard the Guardianship. Countered the Naz, and the player just sort of looked at their 15-card hand for 30 seconds and then was like, yep, I'm dead. Because they were in a Final Fortune turn, and they had no interaction because they had tapped out. But they got way too big for their britches, like too clever on that Mystic Remora play, because their hand had a bunch of mana in it, and Pyroblast, and Veil of Summer, where if they just let their fish die, go to their main phase, play out some mana, and then cast the Naz, they win easily through even just a miracle hit. But that Pact of Negation for Kalia's turn was a miracle hit off Rhystic at the end of the combo chain. The Gamble was a miracle hit off Rhystic at the start of this player's combo chain, and they missequenced their play to make it even live at all, which it shouldn't have been. And then, so this player's dead. Turn order goes back to Atraxa. Atraxa, as predicted, doesn't really do anything. And then we get to my turn, and I pay for my Pact of Negation, and I have an insane Rhystic Study hand at this point. I've banked up like 15 or 20 cards, and even paying for Pact of Negation, I still have plenty to get the game won. And it was crazy. It was giant Rhystic Study game, Rhystic versus Fish, fended off a win attempt narrowly. A greedy play got rewarded from Kenrith, but then they got too greedy on their turn and threw away the win that they had perfectly sculpted. And then when the dust settled, it was me. The third win attempt usually gets it done. And this was just a really insane game where a lot of stuff was happening, a lot of conversations being had about what we need to worry about, when we need to act, etc. And it was really satisfying to get away with that win. And it meant that I was 4-0-1, not only locked for top 8. Here, 2 more rounds of Swiss tomorrow. I'm definitely locked for top 16, and there was a good chance I was already locked for first after Swiss if I just draw twice. Round 6, the next morning, I ID'd because hotel checkout was at 11, and the round started at 9:30, which meant that I could run back upstairs, use my private bathroom one more time, take a nap for an hour, and then come back fully refreshed for the rest of the day. And I did take advantage of all of those services. Round 7, I was first seat again. And I thought, I checked the standings to determine if I need to play. Do I want to leverage this first seat to make sure I'm first seat for the entire top 16 afterwards? Because that's really important, as we've talked about. And I looked at the standings. Only one person, the Kalia player from yesterday, was the only person in the event who could jump me if I drew, which meant that if I draw and he wins, I'm now second seed overall, which still means I'm going first in my top 16 pod. And it means I'm going second in the finals if Kalia wins out, and I'm going first in the finals if Kalia loses. So if Kalia loses or draws round 7, I'm locked for first. If Kalia wins round 7, they would then also have to win the top 16 before I end up second, but I can't possibly be third or fourth seat no matter what. So I took the second draw, and then it turned out Kalia's pod also drew, which locked me for first seat going into the top 16.
Welcome to TopDeck.gg, your community's home for everything competitive Magic has to offer. If you're hosting an event, playing for a huge prize, or advertising your events to thousands of players, we've got you covered. Using intuitive pairing software, playing Magic is a breeze. Players just have to sign up online, then scan the QR code in-store. Give competitors the gift of perfect information as their bracket updates in real time. The self-reporting software saves you time and leaves paper match slips in the past. Leave the heavy lifting to TopDeck.gg so your community can relax and focus on playing Magic.
And this brings us to the elimination rounds, though before my top 16, local cEDH gamer and Magic content creator and podcaster Cal Jones asked if I wanted to go to Wario's, which is a Columbus sandwich spot that is pseudo-famous in the cEDH community because of how often Cal posts about them. And yes, I went to Wario's, I got an insane meatball sub, and I was happy with the use of that time. Fully refueled on meatball sub. The top 16 was me going first, Tivit, which was exciting to play against. Tivit is a very classic control deck with a combo kill, an A-B combo kill, where A is in the command zone and B is either easily tutorable from your deck. Tivit wants a slow game, and Rograkh is pretty good at punishing that if nobody's helping Tivit slow it down. And then there was another Rograkh, because we're near the top, and this is the cream right now. And then Nadu. I have not played against Nadu yet. I know Nadu has been doing well all summer. Obviously, it spawned a whole cEDH archetype just by the card being printed. Made a bunch of weird cards from Legends go from $1 to $35. Is doing some cool stuff, but in 4th seat, I wasn't super worried about it. It's not that fast, and a lot of its cards are really bad because they rely on synergy more than raw power. But I went first. I had my hand had turn 1 Mystic Remora, and then it also had Cabal Ritual and Necro Dominance. So I had the option to cast Necro Dominance on turn 2 if I wanted to get that engine going. Tivit had a turn 1 Dothy Voidwalker, which made me pump the brakes a little bit on sending it. And I ended up just paying for my fish on turn 2. I mental misstepped the other Rog size fish, because I wanted to be the one drawing cards as the game unrolled, not them. They also mulled pretty low. Like, this player was, I did not want to have to compete with my own deck. I wanted to knock out as many players as I could and focus on amassing, because I had the Necro, I had the ability to cast Necro. It was just a matter of time until I could put all the pieces together. Tivit added a Dauntless Dismantler, so now I don't get a graveyard because of Dauthi Voidwalker, and my fast mana comes into play tapped, including Dockside Extortionist. I don't get the mana right away because artifacts enter tapped. That's going to be really tough to shove through. So I had to spend some time figuring out how I was going to navigate that. And then when my fish got up to 4, so I cast it turn 1, it's probably around turn 5 then. In my upkeep, I went Born Upon a Wind with the fish still in play. The pay for this or lose it trigger on the stack. I went Born Upon a Wind. That resolved. Cast the Necro Dominance. That resolved. Then I let the fish die. Then I'm already underborn. I have Necro in play. I figure it's time to do something. And I paid some enormous amount, like whatever it was, I felt like I could get away with. And I set up a situation where I had Bergie in play. I had basically unlimited red mana. I had Dark Ritual and Culling the Weak. So I had lots of black mana, but my only blue source left was City of Brass, which meant that I couldn't get blue for Thassa's Oracle this turn, but I did have access to a Final Fortune effect to take a bonus turn. But Tivit had exactly 1 white mana up, which means that even if I dumped out a bunch of 0 mana artifact enablers, mana enablers, and took an extra turn, Tivit could blow up all my treasures and Moxen before I untap, and then I don't have the mana anyway. And then I'm under a Final Fortune effect, where I have to win this turn or I lose. I don't get a draw step because of Necro Dominance. I have to discard down to 5, and my Born Upon the Wind's already used. So I was pretty worried about that situation and had to solve that. And I came up with a really cool solution where if I gamble for Chain of Vapor and then just announce I'm going to pass, or I gamble for Chain of Vapor, I cast the Final Fortune, and then I announce I'm going to go to cleanup, which means that now Tivit has to blow up my artifacts now, because once I go to cleanup, nobody gets priority again, and then we're just in my next turn, and I have Thassa's Oracle and Tainted Pact to just win with all my new freshly untapped mana. So my plan was pretend I'm passing the turn. When they go to blow up the Dismantler, use Chain of Vapor to bounce my own Necro Dominance, sacrifice the land, bounce the Dauthi Voidwalker. Now my graveyard's back on. All my zeros, including Lionside Diamond, end up in the graveyard. And then I'm still under Born Upon a Wind, so I could actually breach combo right there in the end step now that both of the graveyard hate pieces were gone. That was the line I set up. And I thought I was doing really well. I had 19 cards in my hand when I cast Gamble, and the cards that needed to stay in my hand were Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach, Brain Freeze, and Chain of Vapor. I didn't care about the other 15 cards. I gambled away the Thassa's Oracle into exile, because it's just in exile. And that meant I had to pivot my plan, and I had to use my City of Brass, because doing other stuff, I had used up a bunch of my black mana. So I had just tons of red because of Bergie, and I was down to 1 black. So I had to use my City of Brass to Praetor's Grasp the other Rogside player and take their Thassa's Oracle, so I could still win next turn. But the City of Brass meant I couldn't Chain of Vapor, because that was also my only blue source, and all of my artifact mana, fast mana, was coming into play tap, so I couldn't filter the red into blue with talismans and stuff the way you normally do in these lines. And then these guys started talking about when they should dismantle me, because they knew I had an extra turn coming. I had played a Dockside Extortionist for like 7 tap treasures. I had Mox Opal, Mox Amber, a Lionside Diamond all in play tap. And they were like, oh, just do it in the upkeep. That'll be fine. And I was like, okay, if they wait for the upkeep, I'm Gucci. I'll just get all this mana and I can otter over the top and we'll be fine. But they said, like, yeah, just do it in the upkeep. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll move to cleanup. And then the Tivit player was like, in the end step, I'll activate Dauntless Dismantler. I was like, okay. Either they got me on the hook for a fake conversation making me think about the wrong thing, or Tivit player just panicked and did his own thing after coming up with a plan with the table. Either way, it was probably correct to do it in the end step anyway. And either way, it didn't matter because I had a Wishclaw Talisman in play tapped that the Dismantler didn't kill. I had enough talismans that I had enough mana to untap anyway. And then between the Tainted Pact in my hand, the Thassa's Oracle that I had Praetor's Grasp, and the Wishclaw Talisman in play, I was able to set up a protected Thassa's Oracle combo, even through all of that disruption, and never needed my graveyard. So that was just a lot of words to say we did the Born Necro thing and just flexed on the opponent. When you have 20 plus cards in your hand and you're allowed to cast them all at instant speed, you can generally figure it out as long as you're allowed to cast spells. The things like Deafening Silence and Rule of Law are the ones that are gonna freeze that up, but taxing effects, tapping artifact effects, rest in peace effects, you could beat all that stuff. And it just took a little bit of work and a bad gamble, or else it would have been a much cooler win. All in all, though, this was a very clean textbook kind of Rograkh Seat 1 win, and the other players put up moderate resistance and then died. My finals match started 2 hours after my first game finished because this Sephirus deck is in here. Sephirus of the Hidden Ways. This is an Esper Stacks commander, just dedicated Rule of Law, Archon of Emeria, Eidolon of the Great Revel, Deafening Silence. All of that crap is in this deck, and it wins by getting the initiative and then going through dungeons on boards where nobody could do anything, that just ticks its way through initiative and dungeons. And I was really glad they were in 4th position here, because I didn't want to get squeezed out before I got to go dump out my stuff. And that person ended up winning their pod, but it took them 2 hours to do it. And I was thinking, so my wife was actually on a plane to a training in Chicago. And when we were figuring out, like, I would be on the road this weekend and then she would be leaving town, like, would I be home in time to feed the cats dinner? And I was like, oh yeah, no problem. Shouldn't be an issue. I'll be home by dinner time. But that game took 2 hours. It's close to, I think, like 4 o'clock when this game finishes, when I was hoping to be on the road by 4 o'clock, headed back home to take care of the cats. And that didn't happen. Then we end up in this pod. It's me, another Rograkh, a Timnacrom. So best and most well-rounded and most represented deck in the format. 2 of the current hot deck of the format, and then this shit. Which, you know, congrats to this player. Apparently they're known for this deck, and they played really well, did a lot of cool stuff, which I hope to recall much of here, because, spoiler, this game ended at 8:30 p.m. We started around 4. It was insane. And untimed games in the top 16 cut, which means you play till there's a winner. You cannot draw games in elimination rounds. If a game were to draw, either naturally or unnaturally, the player in first seat takes the win. That is a recent tournament policy change after an event earlier this year where the cEDH community figured out that if a game just bogs down into shit, they could agree to draw and start a new game and just play until somebody wins the round. And earlier this year, there was a top 4 or top 16 pod that just agreed to draw because the game bogged down too hard multiple times and it took zillions of years to finish. And the policy changed to, you play one game, if it ends up in a draw, the top seed wins. So obviously I offered the draw immediately when I sat down. Nobody bit. And then we played. I kept a hand that had Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, Imperial Seal, Soul Ring, Ancient Tomb, Fetchland. which means that Ancient Tomb Soul Ring jumps me on turn 2 from 1 mana to 5, which is a big jump. But it also means, because I have Ancient Tomb as my mana acceleration and not a Mana Crypt or any other artifact I could filter colors out of, I have to just play Imperial Seal on turn 1 off of a fetch land. The fetch land also means I have to decide if I'm going to get black-red or black-blue, because I can't get all 3 colors off of one fetch land, and I need black to cast the Imperial Seal in my hand to set up whatever my turn 2 play is going to be. And that's going to matter in a second. I Imperial Seal for Rhystic Study, because I would prefer to get Necropotence, but I have a single pip of blue or black mana and then 4 colorless, which doesn't cast Necro. I don't really want to Blind Wheel. I don't want a Jeska's Will. And I actually can't Jeska's Will if I want blue mana to play the game with, because I only have the 1 fetch land. And like the color situation was really complicated. So I ended up getting Rhystic Study, and I passed with Rhystic Study on top of my deck, and then I drew Brain Freeze for my first turn as well. So now I have a blue card to go with Force. I have Force, blue card, Fierce Guardianship, Rograkh in play, Ancient Tomb, Soul Ring in my hand, and Rhystic Study on top of the deck. And the second Rogside player dumps out a bunch of mana and casts Windfall, which, to me, I don't really want Windfall to happen, because I wasn't able to get my fast mana out. The Ancient Tomb Soul Ring are still in my hand, but I also don't want to spend one of my counter spells on it. But then Sephiroth forces the Windfall and says, I gotta protect my hand. And then Rogsai fights back over the Windfall. I forget what the counter spell was, but they fight back over the Windfall. And now Sephiroth is down 2 cards, Rogsai's down to basically no resources. They were really counting on the protected Windfall to do a reload. And at that point, I spent my Fierce to protect the counterspell that was countering the Windfall, because I didn't want to lose my hand. And if this person's on low resources, this person's on low resources, I still have Force blue card in my hand and a bunch of mana acceleration. I could turn this into a Rhystic game. That's what I was thinking. Timnachrom does something uneventful on their first turn, unremarkable. And then Sephiroth goes Plains Mana Crypt Archon of Emeria, which is a completely ridiculous magic card that I've never been able to beat in any format that I play. And I had to spend my Force of Will on that, because my plan to go Soul Ring, Rhystic, camp out next turn doesn't work if I can't cast Soul Ring and Rhystic. And if my Ancient Tomb comes into play tapped, there's no sequence, so I have to force that, which pitched my Brain Freeze, which already means that Breach is off for the game, and I'm going to have to win another way. And that's all before I take my second turn. Like, all this has transpired. And then I get to my turn, I play the Rhystic and pass, and then like some stuff happens, whatever. I draw Yawgmoth's Will as my next spell, and I haven't really gotten anything else going. So I Yawgmoth's Will, tapping my Underground Sea Ancient Tomb, or Underground Sea Soul Ring. The Yawgmoth's Will gets to replay the Polluted Delta and the Imperial Seal from turn 1. And so I Imperial Seal for Ad Nauseam and put that on top of my deck. I now have 2 lands, Ancient Tomb, Soul Ring to cast Ad Nauseam with next turn, and Rhystic still in play. I feel like that's a good setup, a good use of a value Yawg Will. And then Timnachrom hits me with Timna. I've done the math that I'm going to be able to Naus from 22. When I get to my turn, I've already taken a lot of damage between Ancient Tomb and combat beats. And then Sephiroth has Deafening Silence, which makes my Ad Nauseam super awkward. So then I have to pump the brakes a little bit, and the game bogs down under the Deafening Silence for a while, and I get to a spot where I have Valley Floodcaller in play. So even through the Deafening Silence, I get 4 spells per turn cycle, and everyone else only gets 1, unless they have, like actual printed instance. But all of my non-creature spells can be cast 1 at a time on a turn. And Sephiroth really starts doing the thing. Timnachrom had Drannith the Magistrate in play, Timna, eventually Crom. There was some other creature as well. I don't think it was a lock piece, but I remember specifically like 4 or 5 creatures in Timna Crom's battlefield. Sephiroth has introduced the initiative at this point with some 5-drop I've never seen. They have some other creatures on the board, and I've dug my way into Mount Doom, which I was so excited to use because not having played a million games of Rograkh, the games you win, you're never close to 7 mana. Sometimes you have Mount Doom, but you don't usually want to cast Silas in a game. He's just there for the colors, but this game had gone so slow that I had just played Silas at some point just to have it in play. I think it was to dissuade Timna from attacking me, just have a Death Touch blocker. And so Silas is just sitting in play. I have 9 mana, and there are something like 8 to 10 other creatures on the board, and I am just like vibrating in my seat. I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna Mount Doom these suckers. I'm gonna hit the initiative player. I'll have the initiative, and nobody else will have a creature, and they won't be able to recover for a long time. And I'm just like kind of giddy. I'm like, this is gonna be such a sick beating. And then Sephiroth casts Harvester of Misery, which is a 5-drop that when it enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, which killed Ragavan was the other creature. It killed Timna, it killed Ragavan, it killed Rog, it killed Silas. I had that ad nauseum in response to the Harvester, just to give my Valley Flood Caller +1/+1, so it didn't die too. And ad nauseum, I took 2 cards. It was literally just for the prowess trigger, but I ended up with like Orcish Bowmaster plus some other spell that wasn't as important as Orcish Bowmaster, then I stopped. And so Floodcaller survived. Bowmaster's a sick draw though, but now Mount Doom's off because my Silas is gone, and that was my legendary artifact I was going to sacrifice. And Drannith Magistrate's a 1/3, so it survived the Harvester of Misery, and I'm never getting Rog or Silas back. Mount Doom's a blank now. It was such an insane card for them to have in exactly that spot. And then we're back to the drawing board. But now I have Bowmaster, and Rograkh has a Rhystic Study in play. I have a Rhystic and a Fish in play. TK has Crom in play. So Bowmaster is a really exciting object on a board where everyone has a draw engine, because you could start weaponizing it where it's like, I won't pay for your Rhystic Study, so I can deal 1 damage to something over here, and you can really control a player. You could control, especially combat-related decks like Timna Crom, or this certain aspects of the Sephiroth deck were really affected by it. Also, Sephiroth had like Mana Crypt Ancient Tomb from the start of the game. Their life total was somewhere around the teens at this point already, so even just outright killing them with enough pings was on the table. But the whole game became about Bowmaster. And then Timna Crom, Phyrexian metamorphed my Bowmaster, killed my Bowmaster. Now they decide where the pings go. And we're all politicking around the Bowmaster pings for a long time. And I am seeing Sephiroth just slowly get control of the game. And I'm just begging the Bowmaster player to deal damage to them. But Timna Crom is incentivized to have Deafening Silence in play, because this deck is great with Deafening Silence in play, and these 2 decks don't function with Deafening Silence in play. So this player is not incentivized to do the same things that I'm incentivized to worry about, where if this player dies, he takes all his Rule of Laws with him, and then these 2 decks work now. And Timna Crom knows that, but Timna Crom also recognizes that at some point Sephiroth will have critical mass and just win, and you don't get to worry about unlocking the Rule of Laws if you're dead. So I am just begging the Bowmaster controller to just leave Sephiroth at like 1 or 2 life. I understand that they need the lock pieces for their own game plan, but if you just leave them at 1 or 2, that turns off Fetch Lands, turns off Force of Will, turns off Ancient Tomb, and with all the Rhystics and Mystics and Chromes in play, casting 1 spell and declining to pay for 2 Rhystics then kills this player at any point. We could just have them locked over a barrel and say, like, basically Tim DeCron can be like, you work for me now. If you do anything I don't like, you die. Full stop. And I just wanted Sephiroth in that position at 1 or 2 life, but they kept him at like 6 to 8 life, which is much harder to kill, even with 3 or 4 Ristic triggers when there's a Deafening Silence in play, because you just can't play that many spells into Ristic. And eventually, the other Rogsai player finds their Bowmaster. They kill the clone Bowmaster. Now they control the pings. And me and Rogsai can work together because our interests are aligned. We need the rule of laws gone. So the Bowmaster now starts picking off Sephiroth for real. And then Sephiroth gets to a point where they're attacking me for lethal. Like, I'm at 10. Other Rogsai player is at like 6 or 7. Sephiroth is at 3. Tim DeCrom's still over 30, but their life total matters less than the rest of us. And with the Deafening Silence in play, because they were at 3, we ended up in a spot where someone cast a spell, it triggered 2 Ristics, put them to 1, someone else cast a spell, and in response to the Ristic, Sephiroth played some clone with flash that would have gained a bunch of life and or given them hexproof, or it would have done something to save them and also kill me. And at that point, I was like, this is why we had to put him to 1. 3 life is too high, 4 life is too high, could have been at 1 this whole time. And I ended up being the only person who could still interact because these 2 players had both cast their Rule of Law spell already. And luckily I had exactly Pact of Negation. No other counter spell that would have helped. I had like Force of Negation, Swan Song, a bunch of stuff that doesn't counter the flash clone that they were playing. So I had to Pact of Negation that, barely stabilize, but that close call did convince this Rogsai player to actually kill Sephiroth, and then we ended up in a spot where Tim DeCrom had Ranger Captain Vios in play, and they had Mystical Tutored for Silence. So they had 2 silences face up, basically. One of them in play. So the rule of laws are gone. But now me and Rog both know that we need to beat 2 silences if we're going to go for it. So we're basically spending each turn trying to jockey the other player into baiting out one of the silences. So then we can each win through 1 silence. Like, I could beat 1 silence, but not 2. And I think this Rog was doing a little better than me. Like, my Floodcaller died at some point. Born Upon a Wind was still in my deck. This player had Floodcaller in play and Born in hand, so could fire multiple instant speed attempts over multiple silences. But like I said, life totals are low. Crom is a air elemental. When I'm at 6 and opponents at 5, air elemental is ruling the entire game. And I had one great moment of politicking here where I think I was at 4. Like, Crom would have killed me if it attacked me, but I had Born Upon a Wind, Demonic Consultation, Tainted Pact, and a couple of counter spells in my hand. And I told Crom, if you attack me, I have to try to win. And I don't think I'm going to be able to win, but it's going to cost you at least one of your silences, and it's going to feed the other Rogsai's Ristic Study as you and I fight over my win attempt in the middle of combat. And then you're going to have to beat this fully loaded Rogsai when I pass the turn with 1 or 0 silences left over. And that dissuaded him from attacking, bought me another turn. And then that turn, this giant stack battle happened in my end step where the other Rog player was using the Floodcaller to try to bait out a silence or bait out a bunch of interaction in my end step from this player to shoot a win on their turn. And we ended up with a giant stack, a bunch of Ristic Study and Crom triggers and Bowmaster triggers. My life is 3 at one point with Bowmaster still in play and cards just flying everywhere. I have to stop drawing off Ristic so I don't just die to Bowmaster damage. And at one point, still in my end step, Rog flashes in a defense grid, which is fascinating to me because I've been holding the win for the entire last 4 or 5 turns, just waiting for a window to shoot it. I can't look too excited about the defense grid because then Tim DeCrom will get suspicious. But if that grid resolves, we're still in my end step, even though this player can cast spells with flash, which means I could fire my win over top of the onboard Ranger Captain. And so I'm like, okay, let's let these two duke it out, and hopefully Defense Grid lands at some point, and then I just go. But Timnacrom does respect the grid, forces that, more stuff happens, giant stack. At least some of this game was streamed to YouTube on the Top Deck channel. I don't know how much. I know they were covering the Invitational at the start, but they finished their match and then they came over to us. Like, this part should definitely be visible. And then kind of the dust settled, and I was not able to shoot a win because there wasn't a defense grid. Neither of the silences had been used during that whole fight. So we go into Rograk's turn, and they put a breach on the stack, which gets the silence on the stack out of Timnacrom. And then they start trying to win over top of the silence. And then at one point, they demonic consultation in response to some spell and name Yawgmoth's Will, because their plan was to bait with Breach, go over the top with Will. But the Will was in the top 6 cards of their consult, so then their deck's just gone, and they're dead. Like, they have the cards that they have to play with, but I think the Oracle went when the consult flipped. So they're actually just dead. And that's exciting for me that Bowmaster is about to leave the game. It's bad for me that Bowmaster is about to leave the game with Ranger Captain of EO still in play, and my opponent has a 4/4 and I'm at 3 life. So, opponent, we go into Timnacrom's turn, and they just go upkeep, sack Ranger Captain. And I thought for sure they would draw for turn, go to combat, and then make me make the first move, but they just upkeep Ranger Captain. And in response, I just went Born, Tainted Pact for Oracle, cast Oracle, Demonic Consultation, clear the rest of the deck, and win in their upkeep. And I thought that was just a full punt when it happened. And I mean, it's not good, but I thought I was hard locked, but we talked about it later. And maybe I would have found this line if I was put in the position to really think about it, but I definitely was not on my radar. Ranger Captain stops non-creature spells from being cast. And Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation are both just naturally instants. So I actually had the line of going Born Upon a Wind in your upkeep, force the action on Ranger Captain. They pop Ranger Cap in response to Born. Then I Demonic Consult, named Thoracle. I flip to the Thoracle. As long as it's not one of the top 6 cards in my deck, we're fine. I find the Oracle, and then I Tainted Pact with Oracle in my hand, still with the silence, the Ranger Captain ability on the stack. I empty all but 1 card from my deck, because Born Upon a Wind is still going to resolve, and I have to draw a card, so I can't go fully empty. I do have to consult first, or else Tainted Pact can't control the last card in my deck, and then I would die to my own cantrip, even after setting up this line. And then all of those effects resolve. The Ranger Captain happens, then Born resolves. I draw the last card in my deck. Now I can play Oracle as an instant because it's a creature. And so I still had a win attempt, even if they didn't aggro pop the captain. But if they had just drawn their card for turn, gone to combat, and made me move first, then we open up Oracle being in the top 6 cards, and then I just lose. We also end up in a spot where, because Ranger Captain has resolved, I won't be able to protect my Oracle, and I did have like Force of Negation and like a couple soft counters in my hand to help push through. I think I had a mental misstep still at the end of the game. I had a couple things left to help win my fight over the Oracle, but if they just go to combat, A, they have an extra card in hand because they haven't even gone to their draw step yet. They just popped it in the upkeep. And B, I could hit the Oracle in the top 6, and I can't win if they find a counterspell between draw step and Crom trigger. So they did mess up, but it wasn't a like deterministic spew. I still did have a win attempt if they have Stone Nothing and everything goes my way. But they did, after 4.5 hours, just get a little antsy, pop their thing a little before they needed to, and died immediately in response. And we walked away the winner. Got this dope trophy. Look at this thing. It's very shiny. It's also very heavy and very pointy. And that brings us to the wrap up. I won the thing after like 13, 14 months of not being able to win a game of cEDH. Back on top, feeling good. Top Deck is an incredible TO. They do sponsor this channel, hashtag sponsored, but also they are just great. Their new app is incredible. Just push notification pairings. Like, I could just be anywhere in the venue, outside, whatever. My phone buzzes, tells me you're table 11, seat 3. Ugh, I love that so much. Push notifications are busted. Judge staff, the Top Deck crew are not just judges that get hired for the weekend. Many of them are actively writing and iterating on tournament EDH policy, so you're really on the cutting edge when you get to play these tournaments. And from the practical getting paid side, sometimes it takes like 6 to 8 weeks for a TO to mail you a check. The owner, Mike, of Top Deck, the second my game finished, I was like picking up my cards from the game I just played, and he was like, "Hey, what's your PayPal? Let me get you paid." So I had the prize money in my account before I even put my deck away from the game I just finished. Like, they are on it. I'm so impressed by them all the time. And like I said at the top, this was a platinum level Top Deck series event, which means I'm qualified for the Invitational next year already, and just got that done. Don't have to worry about that. And here is, of course, the analog picture of my deck. My time with Rograkh Silas, obviously incredible. Going undefeated through a cEDH tournament is pretty crazy. Obviously, I got lucky a couple times. Opponents made mistakes a couple times. But the added variance of having 3 opponents instead of 1, on top of the variance of Magic the Gathering inherently, and like sometimes you flood out, sometimes this, sometimes that. Sometimes you lose a gamble with 18 cards in your hand, wink, wink, and still managing to just catch a few lucky breaks and also play super tight in a few spots and create opportunities for myself to go completely undefeated in 9 rounds. Feels good. I don't think it's going to be easy to replicate that, but I was very impressed by Rograkh Silas. The recent upgrades to the deck have squashed a lot of the concerns I've had about the deck in the past, and it's obviously a real good. And I am going to sign off with that. That was my cEDH Top Deck Open 10K Platinum Event Tournament Report with Rograkh Silas Combo. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon, and I'll see you next time.